The park was unusually quiet for a sunny afternoon. Jeremiah stood by the swings, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his eyes focused on the cracked pavement below. The familiar warmth of the sun no longer felt comforting. In the distance, he could see a woman walking briskly toward him, Sarah, a middle-aged white woman with a look of suspicion that he had come to recognize all too well. As she approached, her gaze lingered on him, and for a moment, Jeremiah's chest tightened. He didn't know why she was staring at him, but he could feel the familiar pang of discomfort creeping in. He was used to it, the unease, the questioning looks. But something about today felt different. Without a word, Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the police. "Yes, I need help," she said, her voice slightly shaking. "There's a young man here who's acting suspicious. I think he's up to no good." Jeremiah froze. His heart began to race as he stood there, unsure of how to respond. The scene before him was unfolding like a nightmare. Everything in his body told him to run, but his legs felt heavy. He knew that one phone call could change everything. "Please hurry," Sarah continued, her voice sharp. "I don't feel safe." For Jeremiah, the warmth of the sun had turned cold, and the reality of his situation set in. He wasn't just a teenager at the park anymore. He was a target. Jeremiah had always been taught to stay calm, to keep his head down, and to avoid trouble. But what if staying calm wasn't enough? What if the world around him had already decided who he was long before he could even speak for himself? At 14, Jeremiah had already experienced more than his fair share of being misunderstood. He was a quiet, introverted kid who loved to read, play basketball, and dream of a life outside his rough neighborhood. His mom, a single parent, had worked tirelessly to give him opportunities that she never had. But despite all her efforts, the world seemed to view him through a different lens. Jeremiah knew the drill. He had seen it happen too many times. Being a young black boy meant he would always be under scrutiny, even when he did nothing wrong. He could already feel his heart racing, the weight of what might happen if Sarah's phone call reached the wrong ears. The fear of being profiled, judged, and arrested was always there, lurking in the back of his mind. Today, however, was different. He was at the park doing nothing wrong. He wasn't causing trouble, he wasn't hanging out with the wrong crowd. Yet, the look in Sarah's eyes told him everything. She had already made up her mind about who he was, and now she was taking action. As he stood there, waiting for the police to arrive, his thoughts raced. What would happen if they showed up? What would they think? Would they listen to him, or would he be just another statistic? He tried to breathe deeply, but it didn't help. His stomach churned with anxiety. Every scenario he imagined ended in one harsh reality. The police would arrive, and he would be seen as a threat. The minutes felt like hours as Jeremiah stood frozen, trying to make sense of the situation. The park around him, usually a safe haven, now felt like a trap. The sound of Sarah's voice became a distant hum, like a countdown to something inevitable. His hands trembled, and his mind raced with thoughts of what would happen next. He tried to tell himself that he could handle it, that the police would see he was harmless, that they would listen. But deep down he knew better. He had seen the way officers treated people who looked like him, heard the stories from his older cousins, and read the headlines about young black boys who had been wrongly accused or worse. "Why today?" he muttered under his breath. "Why me?" The air around him felt thick, heavy, as if it was pressing in from all sides. He glanced around, hoping for someone, anyone, to intervene, to tell Sarah she was overreacting. But the park was empty, and Jeremiah felt completely alone. He tried to calm his racing heart, but it was impossible. He could feel the weight of being judged and misunderstood settling on his chest. And then, as if on cue, the distant sound of sirens reached his ears. Panic surged through him. His legs felt like lead as he turned and walked toward the exit of the park. But he knew it was too late. The sirens were growing louder, closer. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body wouldn't move. All he could do was stand there, a young boy, alone and terrified, as the sound of the sirens grew louder. Every second felt like an eternity. As the police cars screeched to a halt in front of him, Jeremiah's worst fear was realized. He wasn't just a kid at the park, he was a threat. And this time, no one was coming to help. Jeremiah Thompson was just a 14-year-old boy with big dreams. To those who truly knew him, he was the quiet kid with a book in hand, lost in his world of fantasy and ambition. But to the world, especially the people who didn't know him, he was just another black teenager, one of the thousands who walked the streets with suspicion in their wake. He wasn't the kind of kid who caused trouble. In fact, he often found solace in the quiet of his room, where he could escape the expectations placed on him by society. Reading was his escape, his sanctuary. He loved the stories of faraway places, of heroes who overcame impossible odds, and of lives filled with meaning. One of his biggest dreams was to become a writer, to tell stories that would inspire others the way he had been inspired. Jeremiah didn't talk much about his fears, even to his mother. But deep down, he knew that his life would always be different because of his skin color. He could sense it in the way people watched him when he walked through the neighborhood, the way strangers eyed him suspiciously in stores, or the way his teachers sometimes doubted his abilities. The truth was, Jeremiah had already faced countless moments where he was judged, his potential dismissed before he even had a chance to prove himself. At school, he was often the quiet observer, the one who kept his head down, hoping not to draw attention to himself. But even in his quietude he was noticed, and in that noticing, there was always the possibility that someone would make assumptions. But in his heart, Jeremiah was a fighter. He had inherited that resilience from his mother, a woman who had fought for everything she had in a world that had never made it easy for her. Jeremiah knew that his mother was his anchor. Her love and sacrifice shaped him into the person he was today. But no matter how much she fought for him, there was always the reality that the world could turn against him in an instant. Sarah Miller, the woman who had called the police, wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. She wasn't overtly hateful, but she had lived a life shaped by a worldview that was narrow and influenced by biases she didn't even realize she had. Sarah was a middle-aged white woman, a mother of two grown children, who worked as a receptionist at a local office. She had always lived in the same town, surrounded by people who looked like her and shared her perspectives. Sarah had grown up in a home where fear and caution were ingrained in her. Her father had always warned her to be careful around people who were different, especially black men. It wasn't overt racism, more like a quiet suspicion, a set of unspoken rules about whom to trust and whom to avoid. Sarah's life had never really challenged those beliefs, and she had never questioned the biases she carried. When she saw Jeremiah that afternoon, standing in the park alone, something in her gut told her that he didn't belong. Her mind, influenced by years of subtle racial conditioning, immediately categorized him as a threat. Jeremiah didn't do anything to provoke her. He was just there, existing, and that was enough for her to make a call that would change both of their lives forever. Despite the call, Sarah wasn't an inherently malicious person. She wasn't an antagonist in the traditional sense. Person with dreams, fears, and desires. She didn't see the quiet kid who loved reading and dreamed of a future beyond his circumstances. Instead, she saw him through the lens of fear and prejudice. The distance between them was more than just physical, it was ideological. Jeremiah didn't have the luxury of seeing the world through Sarah's eyes. To him, the world was a place where he had to constantly fight to be seen as more than his skin color. Sarah, however, had the privilege of living in a world where her race didn't dictate the way she was treated. Their interaction in the park was more than just an individual encounter. It was a reflection of the larger societal dynamics at play. It was a collision of two very different perspectives, two different experiences of the same world. As the police arrived and the situation escalated, the dynamics of power, fear, and misunderstanding were set into motion. Neither Sarah nor Jeremiah knew that the outcome of this moment would change them both forever. The event that unfolded in the park wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of the larger, pervasive issue of racial profiling and systemic discrimination that continues to plague communities, particularly communities of color. In a world that claims to have made significant progress toward equality, the reality is that racial bias still runs deep, shaping interactions in ways that many don't even recognize. This story speaks to the lived reality of millions of young black men and women who face judgment and suspicion simply because of the color of their skin. From the moment Jeremiah stepped into the park, he was perceived not as an individual but as a threat. His mere presence caused fear and discomfort in a woman who didn't even know his name. This kind of racial profiling is all too common, particularly in areas where communities are racially homogeneous or where media portrayals of black people have created a false narrative of criminality and danger. While the story may seem specific, it highlights the broader issue of systemic racism. Often do we allow these unconscious biases to influence our actions? How often do we choose to see people through the lens of their appearance rather than their humanity? And perhaps most importantly, how can we break these cycles of prejudice and work toward a world where assumptions don't dictate outcomes? This story is not just about the incident in the park, it's a call to action. It's a reminder that the biases we carry, even unconsciously, have real-world consequences. Racial profiling is not just a police issue, it's a societal issue. It's about the assumptions we make every day, the decisions we unconsciously allow ourselves to make about others based on their appearance, background, or identity. The first step in addressing this issue is awareness. We must all be willing to confront our own biases, no matter how uncomfortable or difficult that might be. It's easy to dismiss these issues as problems that belong to others, but the truth is that everyone has a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world. We can start by simply asking ourselves, how can we make sure that our actions are based on empathy and understanding, rather than fear and assumption? If we want to create real change, we must be willing to have uncomfortable conversations, challenge our own assumptions, and actively work toward dismantling the systems of inequality that still exist in our society. It starts with small steps, being mindful of our biases, speaking out when we see injustice, and advocating for policies that promote equality. Jeremiah's story is just one example of how bias affects people's lives, but it's a story that should serve as a catalyst for broader societal change. It's time we confront the uncomfortable truths and take action to create a world where people like Jeremiah can walk through a park without fear of being judged, harassed, or criminalized. As the tension rises, the situation seems inevitable. Jeremiah, standing alone in the park, is feeling the weight of the world press against him. The phone call to the police has escalated quickly, and he can hear the urgency in Sarah's voice as she describes him to the dispatcher. The officers are already on their way, and Jeremiah knows he must act fast. He's not sure if running away will make the situation better or worse, but his heart races as fear wraps around him like a vice. His mind races through the worst-case scenarios. A confrontation with the police, the possibility of being wrongfully arrested, the potential consequences of being labeled as a criminal simply because of the color of his skin. From his perspective, the world has suddenly become a much more dangerous place. What was supposed to be a peaceful afternoon at the park is now a nightmare. The friendly, familiar surroundings of the neighborhood now seem threatening and cold. Jeremiah wishes he could just disappear into the crowd or fade into the shadows. But there's no hiding from the situation that's unfolding in real time. Just as he begins to feel the overwhelming weight of the moment, his body stiff with fear, his thoughts scattered, a new sound cuts through the air. A sleek black SUV rolls into the park, its engine humming loudly against the tense silence. Jeremiah can't help but turn his head, his heart skipping a beat. Who is this? Is it another officer, or maybe someone else coming to make the situation worse? He's not sure what to think, but a strange sense of unease settles deeper into his chest. The SUV door opens, and to Jeremiah's shock, out steps someone he recognizes. His mother. She's dressed in an immaculate professional suit, the kind she wears to meetings with city officials. His breath catches in his throat as he watches her stride confidently toward him, her heels clicking against the pavement, completely unaware of the chaos surrounding him. The police officers, who had arrived just moments earlier, stop in their tracks when they see her approach. Sarah, who had been so adamant about calling the authorities on a dangerous young man, freezes in disbelief as the woman walking toward them is none other than Mater Thompson, Jeremiah's mother. The sight of his mother standing before the officers is a moment of profound clarity. The entire situation shifts in an instant. The once intense standoff between Jeremiah and Sarah is suddenly reduced to something awkward and uncomfortable. as the truth about Jeremiah's identity is revealed. He isn't some random teen in a park. He is the son of the city's mayor, a highly respected public figure who has fought for justice, equality, and the betterment of their community. Sarah's face pales as the realization hits her. She has just made an enormous mistake. The police officers look from her to Mayor Thompson, their expressions a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Jeremiah, standing there frozen in disbelief, suddenly feels a sense of relief wash over him, though it's tempered by the absurdity of the situation. How could this be happening? His mother stops in front of Sarah, her gaze steady and unwavering. Is there a problem here? She asks, her voice calm but filled with authority. The tension that had been building for minutes seems to evaporate as soon as she speaks. It's as if the world has shifted entirely, and everyone now realizes that this young man standing here isn't just any teenager. He is someone who cannot be easily dismissed or ignored. The transformation in Sarah's expression is immediate and visible. Her hands tremble slightly as she tries to process what has just happened. The shock on her face is palpable. All the assumptions she had about Jeremiah, about his potential danger, his place in society, his worth, are shattered in a single moment. There's a mix of guilt, shame, and disbelief as she stares at Mayor Thompson, who is now standing next to her son. She is speechless, unable to reconcile the image she had created in her mind with the reality standing before her. The police officers, initially tense and ready to act on Sarah's call, now appear flustered. One officer steps forward cautiously, trying to piece together the situation. "Ma'am," he says, his voice strained, "we were just responding to a call." Mayor Thompson raises her hand, her gaze unwavering. "I understand. I'm sure it must have been unsettling to receive a call like that." Her tone is cool but firm. "But I need you to understand that my son, Jeremiah, he's a good kid. He's never been in trouble with the law, and he certainly isn't a criminal. It's unfortunate that he had to face this kind of treatment today." Jeremiah, still processing the sudden turn of events, feels his body relax as his mother speaks. His eyes meet hers, and for the first time since the incident began, he feels a glimmer of hope. His mother's presence is a shield, protecting him from the prejudices and assumptions that had been leveled against him. Sarah, for her part, stands silently, clearly at a loss for words. The officers look from one another, unsure of how to respond. It's clear they are caught between their duty to respond to the call and the undeniable fact that they've just witnessed a highly charged situation resolve in a way they never expected. As the initial shock of the twist begins to settle, the focus shifts to resolving the conflict at hand. Mayor Thompson stands tall, her presence commanding attention, and Jeremiah, though still shaken, stands beside her with newfound strength. The police officers, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, exchange uneasy glances. The air is thick with tension, and yet, in this moment, a strange peace begins to form. Mayor Thompson, with the authority of someone who has navigated countless political and social challenges, addresses the officers calmly but firmly. "I understand your duty," she begins, her voice measured and clear. "But you must also understand that this is not just about a mistaken call or a misunderstanding. This is about systemic racism. It's about how a young black man is automatically assumed to be a threat because of the color of his skin." Her words hang in the air, heavy with truth. Jeremiah watches the officers carefully. He can see the internal conflict in their eyes. They are not bad people, but they have been part of a system that has long perpetuated such assumptions. They are not the enemy, but they are part of a larger problem. One of the officers clears his throat, his face reddening. "Ma'am, we apologize if there was any misunderstanding," he says, but his words lack the conviction that they should. It's clear that despite the apology, the officers are still struggling to grasp the depth of the issue. "Apologizing doesn't fix this," Mayor Thompson responds, her voice steady but firm. "What matters now is how we move forward. How we ensure that what happened today never happens again." At this point, the other officer speaks up. "We'll file a report, of course, but—" "No," Mayor Thompson interrupts. "This isn't just about one call or one misunderstanding. It's about the biases that exist in our communities, in our police departments, and in our everyday lives. This is a conversation that needs to happen on a much larger scale. She turns to Sarah, who is still standing quietly, her face a mixture of guilt and regret. The realization of her mistake weighs heavily on her, and she seems unsure of how to respond. Mayor Thompson steps toward her, her gaze unwavering. "Sarah," she says, her tone softening, "I know that your intentions weren't to hurt anyone. But what you've done today, in making that call, has hurt someone. It's a reminder of the bias that we all carry, whether we acknowledge it or not." Sarah, her voice shaky, nods. I didn't mean it that way. I was scared. I didn't know. Fear is a powerful thing." Mayor Thompson responds. "But it's also what keeps us from seeing each other as human. It's what makes us act out of assumptions rather than understanding." The silence between them is long, heavy with the weight of the moment. Sarah looks down at her feet, clearly embarrassed but also reflective. There's a chance for growth here, if she chooses to take it. Jeremiah, standing beside his mother, feels a mix of relief and anger. He's grateful that the situation has de-escalated, but he knows that this is just the beginning. The conversation, the lessons, the changes, they all need to happen now. It's not enough for this moment to pass without action. It's time for the community to address the issues that have been ignored for so long. The resolution of the conflict is not the end of the story. In many ways, it's just the beginning. This incident, though seemingly isolated, is part of a larger, deeply rooted issue that affects countless communities around the world. The police, the community members, and even Sarah herself have been participants in a system that perpetuates fear and bias, often without realizing it. The lesson of this moment is not just that one call was mistaken, but that these biases exist in all of us, even those who may not consciously choose to harbor them. For Jeremiah, this experience is transformative. It's a harsh reminder that no matter how hard he works to be a good person, the world might still judge him based on the color of his skin. He has always dreamed of a future where he can rise above such limitations, where his achievements will define him, not his race. But this incident brings him face to face with the uncomfortable reality that he may never escape this bias. It's a hard pill to swallow, and it makes him question whether the world will ever truly change. But there is hope. Mayor Thompson's stance, her unwavering commitment to justice, gives him a sense of comfort. She's been fighting for change in the community for years, and while this moment is personal to her, it's also a stark reminder of the work that still needs to be done. She vows to take action, within her office, within the community, and with the police department, to ensure that incidents like this do not happen again. The ripple effect of this moment begins to spread through the community. People start to talk. They begin to discuss not just the incident, but the larger issue of systemic racism and bias. This incident, while painful, has ignited a conversation that needs to happen. It's forced people to look at their own biases and question their assumptions. It's forced people to see that these issues are not just someone else's problem, but problems that affect everyone. The mayor's office begins to hold town halls and community meetings where people come together to discuss racial profiling, police reform, and the need for greater empathy in their community. For the first time in a long time, the conversation shifts from blame and division to understanding and change. The community as a whole starts to recognize that they all have a role to play in making their society more just. A few days after the incident, a town hall meeting is organized by the mayor's office. The room is filled with a diverse group of people: residents, activists, business owners, law enforcement officers, and community leaders. The air is thick with anticipation as the community comes together to discuss what happened and how they can move forward. Mayor Thompson opens the meeting, addressing the crowd with the same calm authority she displayed during the park confrontation. "This is not just about one incident," she says. "This is about a broader issue that we've been ignoring for far too long. Racial bias, prejudice, and fear are deeply embedded in our society. We cannot ignore this any longer." The room is silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The mayor opens the floor to others, allowing people to share their thoughts. Some speak passionately about their own experiences with racism, recounting incidents where they were treated unfairly or unjustly because of the color of their skin. Others share stories of how they've witnessed bias in their workplaces or within their families. There's anger, pain, but also a sense of unity. At one point, a local police officer speaks up. As a law enforcement officer, I've seen how fear can shape our actions, he says. We're trained to protect and serve, but we're also human. We carry our own biases, whether we realize it or not. It's time for us to take a hard look at how we interact with the community and how we can do better. The discussion continues, and although there are differing opinions, there's a common thread: the recognition that change is needed. There's a collective desire to improve, to create a society where people aren't judged based on the color of their skin. And this meeting, though painful, marks the beginning of that change. As the meeting ends, Jeremiah walks quietly beside his mother, Mayor Thompson. The evening sky is painted with hues of pink and orange, a peaceful contrast to the storm that had passed earlier in the day. The world around them feels different now, more uncertain but also more hopeful. There is still much work to be done, but they have taken the first step toward change. Jeremiah's thoughts are a whirlwind. He had never imagined his life would be turned upside down by a single phone call, but the events of the day have made him realize how fragile his position in society truly is. For the first time, he questions his dreams. Can he achieve them in a world that continues to see him through a lens of fear and suspicion? As they walk home, Mayor Thompson turns to him. I know today has been a lot for you, but I want you to remember this. Change doesn't come overnight. It's a slow, difficult process. But it starts with moments like these. It starts with standing up, even when you're scared, even when you feel small. Jeremiah nods, but the weight of her words settles heavily on his shoulders. He knows she's right. Change is a long road, but this experience has given him a new understanding of the importance of fighting for that change. He no longer feels powerless. The support of his mother, the community, and the lessons he's learned today will fuel him in the years to come. The two of them continue walking in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the quiet streets. Jeremiah is tired, but he knows that tomorrow will bring new challenges, and with those challenges, the chance to make a difference. The camera shifts to the present moment. A still shot of the town hall meeting. People still gathered in small groups, discussing, reflecting. The story has touched many lives, but it's not over yet. You've heard Jeremiah's story, the narrator says, but his is just one of many. Each of us has the power to make a difference, to fight against the biases we carry, and to push for a more just and equal world. But it all starts with us taking responsibility for our actions and our assumptions. The camera then focuses on a close-up of the audience, different faces, all deep in thought, reflecting on what they've just heard. So, what do you think? The narrator continues. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Have you ever made assumptions about someone based on the color of their skin or the way they look? The screen pauses, encouraging the viewer to take a moment to reflect. Take a moment and share your thoughts with us. We want to hear your stories, your experiences. Because this is how change begins, with honest conversations and a commitment to making things better. Encouraging comments, likes, and shares, the narrator finishes. Join us in continuing this conversation. Together, we can change the world, one story at a time. The screen fades from the final reflective moment to an uplifting shot of the town, now at night, illuminated by streetlights and the glowing windows of homes. The sound of distant chatter and laughter can be heard, a symbol of the ongoing dialogue that has been sparked. The town is waking up to the reality of its own biases, and now it's beginning the difficult work of change. The narrator's voice returns. The story we've shared today isn't over. It's just the beginning. We all have a part to play in creating a better world, a world where no one is judged by the color of their skin or the assumptions others make about them. The camera zooms out to show a group of people walking together down the street, diverse, united. If you believe in the power of empathy, of understanding, and of standing up for what's right, we need you to be a part of this movement. Subscribe, join the conversation, and share your story. A call to action flashes on screen. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can make a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. The video cuts to a closing image of the mayor's office with an open door, symbolizing the hope for future progress. The narrator's final words, soft but resolute, linger in the air. It's not easy, but we must keep fighting. For justice, for equality, for change.